We are back and we have got to talk about some dirty birds.
It was fun to talk about a dirty bird, but it would be unsanitary.
And this team has had some really high highs, but they've also had some really low lows. So let's get into this thing. We need to talk about coaching staff, roster, free agency strategy, and we'll get into that 7-round mock draft. Let's go. Let's do it. Let's get into this roster first up and talk about the offensive line, which has had a bit of a weak point, in my opinion, this season. And it's definitely not done a good enough job of protecting Michael Penix week in and week out, especially on that right side of the offensive line. Elijah Wilkerson's had to play because Caleb McGarry is out for the season. Storm Norton should be coming back soon. Maybe he'll help them out over there at that right tackle position. But right now, that has definitely been an issue for this football team. And even guys like Chris Lindstrom, we think of him as like an all-pro guard. I think he's made a big step back this season, possibly because, hey, he doesn't have that chemistry right now with Elijah Wilkerson. Those things can be part of it, but he's losing one-on-one reps a lot more than what I'm accustomed to seeing from Lindstrom. Maybe I lowered him a little bit too overall. He's still a good player and everything like that, but I do think he's struggled a lot more than what he has in the past this season. Hinton played pretty well this past week versus the Patriots in lieu of Matthew Bergeron over at left guard. He's their main swing interior offensive lineman. Ryan Newsle's been very, very solid at center. I think they've done a good job at least finding somebody there at center, and he's under contract too this offseason. Now, going into 2027, they could look at drafting and developing an interior offensive lineman. And the reason I say that is because Newsle and Bergeron are both free agents, and there's a good chance that they have to let go of one of those guys, because then you'd be paying all 5 of your offensive linemen. And I just don't know if that's something that, from an organizational standpoint, you want to do. We'll see what happens. They could end up moving on from McGarry at that point, so maybe they feel a little more comfortable with that. And maybe you just say, hey, let's go and draft the tackle instead. That's going to be something that they're going to have to really think about. Overall, I would just say that in terms of draft needs here, you're going to be looking at an interior guy to be able to develop, at least get some more depth on the interior. That would be my big suggestion for a draft need. And then you're going to need to get McGarry back, get him healthy, and he's not going to, magically fix pass protection and be a great blindside protector. That's not really his game. He tends to struggle too early in the season, and he ends up getting a little bit better as the season goes along. You got Jake Matthews on the opposite end, who's under contract. So both of their tackles are under contract going into 2026. It would be something where I still would love to see what Jack Nelson looks like in practice and things like that. Norton is under contract too as their swingman. So even though it would be something I would really like to think about, at the same time, there are other needs on this roster, and they have a limited amount of draft capital. They're going to have to really be strategic with where they want to go. They don't have a first-round pick. They only have 5 draft picks. The interior, as I said before, that could be thrown a pick out in the draft right there. And then we got to talk about other areas like wide receiver, which is also a need for this football team. You got Drake London. Now, London, to me, is not a true, top flight number 1 wide receiver in the NFL, mainly because he really doesn't separate consistently enough. And you can even go back to this past week versus Christian Gonzalez. He doesn't have that number 1 separation ability. Now, he's a great wide receiver, okay? He mossed Marcus Jones a couple of times in the end zone, and he's a great receiver. I don't want to discount that. He's still a superstar type of receiver in the NFL. But does he have that separation ability that this team could use in the yak ability? No. I think none of these guys really. Darnell Mooney is the best guy in terms of that. But Pitts, London, they're not really yak guys. They really could use somebody that you get the ball out quick, Michael Penix, and you let him run and pick up 5 to 10 yards after the catch. They don't really have that guy. Mooney's definitely taken a step back. He's dealt with a lot of injuries, so to be fair, he has dealt with a lot of injuries. So maybe the second half of the season, we can see a little bit more of that Darnell Mooney that we saw from last season and further on and back in his career. As of right now, though, Mooney has definitely struggled, and he's just not been himself at the catch point either. You got Cordell Hodge. Last week was solid. Didn't see a whole ton of him this week versus New England. Casey Washington's injured right now. You got David Sills. They need more help in this wide receiving room, especially when you look into 2027 and beyond. There's nobody under contract here. Pitts is a free agent after this season. So those are all very much things that we need to start thinking about with this wide receiving room. And that would be something in this draft class, which is a solid wide receiving class. I think would make a lot of sense for them to be able to draft somebody in that range. I do list Kyle Pitts as a wide receiver mainly because he's been playing more as a slot weapon for this football team with the amount of injuries and where they're at as a depth position with this wide receiving room. And then we go into the tight end room where Charlie Warner's been more at the inline tight end. You got Tegan Quintariano as a backup here. Overall, their tight end room, another area that they could get some backup depth. Plus, with Kyle Pitts, he is a free agent. Pitts has played really well. And then we can talk about Pitts in this tight end wide receiver room and a little bit of combination there. He's played like not like a number 4 overall type of pick, but he's definitely played like a back end of the first round, second round type of draft pick this season. Certainly been a lot better for Kyle Pitts. And of course, it's in a contract year. You would have loved to see this earlier on in his career. However, where it's at right now, I would say that with the weapons that they have currently, I would try to bring him back. He's certainly been a vocal point for them. Let's go on to the running back room. Bijan Robinson is one of the most dynamic, make you look silly type of running backs in the NFL. Sometimes, the offensive line isn't always opening up tons and tons of lanes, or they're just not committing to the run enough. I think there's a little bit of a catch-22 with Zach Robinson and the offensive play calling. So that to me is something they can really work on in not being so like generic with the play calling and stuff like that. Sometimes it's like, okay, we'll just hit them an inside zone at a pistol. They're a very pistol heavy sort of team, and it's almost repetitive to the point where you can guess their play calling a little too often. It is what it is, but Bijan's amazing. Tyler Algier amazing. Algier is a free agent, so he could be a guy that ends up getting paid somewhere else to be a starting running back. Many teams will be like, hey, Algier, come be our starter for us. That may be something where they have to say, all right, we can't pay, because Robinson's going to come under contract in a couple years. They can't pay both of these guys, is my guess. So Algier would be somebody where it's like, thank you so much, you're amazing, but at the same time, we may have to go cheaper to be a good backup behind Bijan. That's really my take on it at this point. But Dijon, amazing, of course. Quarterback, Michael Penix. Let's have a conversation. There's some Michael Penix bias here. I'm a huge Michael Penix fan going back to the IU days, and I still see why Michael Penix can be a franchise quarterback. He's got to play better. His accuracy has not been as where it needs to be, and some of it is on the offensive play calling. Some of it is on Michael Penix. Yeah, I can't blame it all on Zach Robinson, but there is some blame in both departments. Penix, the talent is there. I just want to see maybe some better offensive line play and some better overall coaching to help him out too. However, he's also got to hit his wide receivers on time and really in stride a little bit more consistently. Kirk Cousins, he will 99.9% sure that he will be gone after this season, especially with his cap hit and everything like that. But Penix, I'm definitely saying, hey, let's give him a little more time here before we hit the code red or anything. I still see a lot from Penix where it's like, yeah, this dude can be a franchise quarterback. On to the defense here, and we look at this defensive line, which has been majorly improved. They are getting after the quarterback at a totally different level than what they have in past like 3 or 4 years. And that is definitely something that is a positive to this football team. Now, what do they need to improve on this interior defensive line or this defensive line in general? Is making sure that they keep this rotation going in this offseason. I love the rotation that they have right now. Keeping the amount of depth that they have is really key. Zach Harrison was injured this past week. Guys like Jalen Walker stepped up in a major way. Even though he got beat in coverage sometimes, he still was great. I thought he played an excellent game versus New England. And throughout the season, like you've seen flashes of Walker and James Pierce. Both of those guys have shown some really good flashes that I feel confident that they've got a couple of staple pieces for this football team. So with that being said, like Terry Fontenot going up and getting the maneuver to get James Pierce Jr., is that worth it to give up a first rounder? We will find out. However, when you look at the returns so far, I would say that they've gotten enough where I'm feeling pretty positive about that. But Walker definitely had a monster game as a defender around the line of scrimmage, as a pass rusher versus New England. You saw him getting after the quarterback, being a disruptor, whether it's a strip sack that James Pierce picks up and could have gotten into the end zone, or between Pierce getting after the quarterback, but Walker getting his hands up, making plays. This defensive line has certainly been good. And Zach Harrison's definitely been a bit of an unsung hero, too, for this defense line. I think he's had a really good season. Every time I watch now, he was out this past week, but he's definitely been a really impact player on this defense line who can play a little inside out. The interior, though, here, and even Ebiketie, also want to mention him. He's been a nice impact player, too, for this football team. He had a nice week versus New England. And then on the interior, Dorless has made his impact known. Another dude had coming off a nice week. Cal London had a nice week. Roberts has been a really good surprise here. Ruka it's a good place, too. I mean, I want to see a little bit more from him, but as a pass rusher, he's definitely been there. Anyman has been their best run defender on this interior. And that leads me to their biggest thing that they could use is a good, solid run defender. Onyemata is a free agent. He's getting older. What is he, like 33 now at this point, or at least going into the offseason? They're going to have to really think about finding that big man to complement, I don't know, Aruka Roro, Sam Roberts, Brandon Dorless. Like, that's really what they're missing in this room. So that will be my thing to go after in the free agency and in the draft, is finding somebody who can be that big, stout run defender and keep more of these linebackers clean and stuff like that. So on to the linebacking position here, where you got Divine Diablo, who was having a dominant level start to the season. They got injured, unfortunately. Caden Ellis has been really rock steady. He's got his limitations in coverage. Don't expect him to be an immense, drop back and make tons of plays, but he does enough, and he is really, really good around the line of scrimmage. Like, that is his game as a blitzer. He's one of the best at that in the business. So you got two good linebackers when healthy. Ellis is a free agent after this season. I don't expect him to be extremely expensive, but there's going to be somebody that wants to pay him at least a Robert Spillane type of contract, I'm guessing, if not a little bit more than that. So they're going to have to determine whether or not he's in the budget. Divine Diablo is a free agent in 2027. They need depth, and clearly they need depth. It shows. J.D. Bertrand is more of a special teamer, hybrid blitzer, in my opinion, at this point. He's not really a guy that I think can hold up in the NFL consistently as a starter. He is a rookie, so we got to give him a little bit more time. He's just really struggled so far, and that's more of a testament to what Terry Fontenot has had to do with limitations in cap, needing more depth in this linebacking room. That is really the problem. I think you can't blame Bertrand for having to be thrown out there as a 5th-round pick. He should be a special teamer early on and being able to develop rather than having to be thrown out there as a full-time starter. So there's that. That is, to me, more of an issue with this than straight up Bertrand. We need to see him develop and be more of a special teamer and like a hybrid blitzer sort of guy, not somebody that's a full-time starter. So they need to bring in a veteran. They need to bring in like 2 veterans this offseason to be some key depth for these guys. Let's go on to the cornerback room now. This is something they don't have to invest in like highly, but it is something that ideally you would throw a 3rd or 4th round draft pick into. And the reasoning I say that is Mike Hughes has had a bit of a step back this season. He played better this week versus New England. I thought he really stepped up and did a better job, at least holding his own. AJ Terrell's really, really good, but it's kind of been like that for the past couple of seasons. Like Terrell, Hughes had to come in. He had a good year last year, but AJ Terrell is still very, very solid. Mike Hughes, for his contract, is definitely solid. But he is going to be going into a contract next year where you could get out of it, and it's something that they could invest in, think about the future, and then going into 2027, you're going to need a corner. So that's why this would be a draft and develop 3rd, 4th round type of positioning. Plus, their depth-wise doesn't instill a whole ton of confidence. Yeah, Clark Phillips is out right now. Mike Ford. You do have Kobe Bryant. We'll see. D. Alford is a backup slot. He got toasted a couple of times this week versus New England in the slot, filling in for Billy Bowman Jr. I mean, Alford's had a decent season in general, but he is a free agent. Bowman is their clear starter going forward. I think he's been cemented himself as a starter in the slot for this football team. So that's what I would say. Their depth at cornerback is a concern. If you start having injuries, then it gets a little slimy, gets a little bit tricky. Not to mention, they still need to invest in this cornerback room for the future. So we'll see what we can do. 3rd, 4th round pick, though, ideally is where I would look at. This is, to me, more of a draft and develop type of area that I would look at rather than a free agency thing, but it could be still depending on who you can get in free agency. Safety-wise, they're in a pretty good spot here. Now, Jesse Bates, he finally made a play this season. Okay, I haven't seen a whole ton of Jesse Bates making more of Jesse Bates type of plays, right? He's a big hitter. He's a playmaker. We need to see more of that. He got his first interception that I saw. Let's see. I think he got one other interception. I don't remember him getting other interceptions. Pardon me. I watch all 32 teams, but I watch all the games. Jesse Bates did get an interception, though, this week. It was like an overthrow over the middle, and he cradled that thing underneath. But Bates, still a good safety, okay? But for the contract that he's being paid, you might want to start thinking about that. So this could be something you draft and develop at the end of the draft, like 5th through 7th round, UDFA, at least bringing in somebody there. Xavier Watts is more of their free safety of the future. So my view on this would be bringing in a box safety to go along with Xavier Watts. So if you're looking for any safety, yeah, I'd be looking at more of a strong side. Let Xavier Watts be the free safety of the future, and then you go from there, which is fine. You can find a box safety later in the draft to be able to develop. You got DeMeco Helms, who could also play a little box hybrid linebacker for them right now. And that's kind of what I would suggest them to do at this moment. Play a little more dime packages too. Going to the coaching staff here, where I do think they probably need to make some changes. At minimum, the offensive coordinator. Overall, I would probably say new head coach, offensive coordinator. If you can keep Jeff Ulbrich, I think he's done a decent job here for the defensive coordinator position. But coaching wise, I don't know. I feel like Raheem Morris, Zach Robinson, at this point, we need to probably consider a move on. Even Terry Fontenot as the GM, he's had some. I mean, there's been some really good picks. I don't want to knock on some of these guys. It just comes down to who they could have drafted, of course. With the whole, maybe it was Arthur Smith making the calls to and saying, "Hey, I want Kyle Pitts over a Jamar Chase or a Penei Sewell." It is tough, right? But I'm not going to question somebody like Michael Penix Jr. I still think he'd be a franchise quarterback. I think that when you talk about Bijan Robinson, he's such an impact and what he can be. So I don't want to completely knock on his drafts or anything like that. But at the same time, there have been some question maneuvers and how things have been handled and stuff like that. Raheem Morris, Zach Robinson, though, is definitely something where if you want to go with some more experience, Mike McCarthy might give you a little more of that experience. Or Todd Monken bring him back to Georgia. That'd be a little fun little story as well. So they're going to have to really think about the coaching staff this offseason. It starts with the ownership, too, and that's partially to blame as well. That's a whole different subject. But anyway, what's going on there? Let's go on to free agency, though, okay? Player cuts. I'm going to move on from Kirk Cousins, Darnell Mooney, and Charlie Warner. The one I struggled with here was really Darnell Mooney. I do think Mooney is still a really talented wide receiver, and we only saved $7.48 million. However, that's a lot of money. And what I'm thinking, too, is they've had a problem with depth. When they start having some injuries, which every team has injuries, this football team has just not had enough depth to really get through. And that is why I'm thinking to myself, okay, we could turn that into 2-3 football players to give us a little bit more depth. And then we go into the draft in a good wide receiver class and maybe find somebody on day 2 that we can help be an impact right away. So that's really what it comes down to here. I'm on the fence with that one. That's where I'm at, though, as of right now. Kirk Cousins, we're going to let go. And then Charlie Warner, another area that I think we can find cheaper blocking inline tight ends here. And we can also use that money to re-sign Kyle Pitts. Speaking of which, we're going to re-sign Kyle Pitts. 4 years, $68 million. Of course, he shows up in the contract year. It is what it is. Hopefully, he can continue that. And he does have a good chemistry with Michael Penix Jr. So allowing him to continue his development, he's still a very young football player. And hopefully just continues to come into his prime of career. And you see these tight ends where a lot of times it takes these tight ends when they come into like 25 through 30, they get into that zone. So hopefully Pitts does that and we lock him up into that range. And then on defense, I want to bring back Arnold Ebiketie. Having him as some depth is huge. And then Caden Ellis, I decided to bring him back 2 years, $20 million, $10 million a season. So that puts him in line with kind of like the contracts of last season and the Robert Spillanes. And that's actually more than Robert Spillane. Who else would have put, like, Dre Greenlaw? That puts him in that line of Dre Greenlaw's contract out there. So Caden Ellis, great football player. Let's try to keep him back if we can. Does give us it takes a good amount of the cap from those 3 guys. Then we go into the restricted and exclusive restricted area where we're just going to bring back these guys here. Natron Brooks, special teamer, return man. Cal London's been a nice player. He's been exclusive restricted. You got Javon and Glenn, who's injured right now, and then also practice squad to fill it out there. On to the free agent signings, outside free agent signings here. My main goal was finding depth across this roster. And when we start with Skylar Thompson here as the backup quarterback, you got Damian Pierce to be the backup with Bijan. And then you got Elijah Moore coming in here on a 1-year deal. Same thing, Foster Moreau, give him a little bit of depth. I think Moreau coming in here from the Saints. We go purchase a Saints guy. He's a free agent there. And we steal somebody. And then on the defense side of the ball, we got Kyrus Tonga, who they just faced over at New England. And I thought he made some really nice plays in that game. Great run defender. And that's exactly what they could use. A big body nose tackle up on that interior. Just make it even easier for those interior rushers like Ruggiero and also Dorless. And then you got EJ Speed and Jerome Baker. This is, as I mentioned before, let's get some depth. I want to make sure we've got guys that can come in here, play that 3rd, 4th linebacker role, and I feel really good about bringing in both of those guys to be able to do that in case we have injuries and stuff. And they got $4 million for projected draft spend, so it takes us right down to the wire there. Let's talk about the roster once more before we get into the draft. Highlight needs once again. I do think interior is going to be something I look at. Tackle would be something ideally still at this moment, though I think they're setting themselves up for a 2027 draft pick at the tackle position with the contracts, with McGarry getting a 2-year extension. Jake Matthews is still well under contract. So that's why I'm thinking this is probably more of a 2027 contract or draft type of need. So interior is something I'm going to focus on in this draft. Other than that, wide receiver will be the other area. Tight end, I would say you could probably bring in a cheap veteran either in training camp with some of that extra money because remember, some of these guys will be practice squad candidates and some will, end up making the roster and you'll have dudes that compete in training camp and they can bring in a little bit more money post June 1st with some other cuts that they'll end up letting go on this roster. Wide receiver would be the other area that I'll be looking at the draft for sure. That'll be like a day two type of need. On the defense side of the ball, I would still say the defensive line could use more as much depth as it can get, and we can always try to do that. Finding another interior player would be something I would consider, another edge rusher, just BPA between the two. Linebacker, I I still wouldn't mind throwing a pick on it, just considering Divine Diablo is going to be going into a contract year. Maybe they can extend him. However, with EJ Speed, Jerome Baker, it's not going to be something I prioritize doing, especially with like cornerback being a bigger need to look at, in my opinion, finding another guy who can develop behind Mike Hughes with him going into a contract year for that 2027 deal. That would be something that I would really consider. Slash, if you have injuries and stuff like that, you need somebody that can work into that cornerback 3 role. Then safety wise, also something that I think this is more of a late round pick, finding a box safety you can develop in here behind Xavier Watson, Jesse Bates, and Demeco Helms as that 4th guy early on. So it is that time. It's draft time. Let's go. We got Jeremy Bernard, the wide receiver from Alabama. And this is exactly the type of wide receiver that I think this team is missing. He's one of the toughest yak guys at the top of this class. He's really got that build where he is not easy to tackle because of his frame and his overall like girth and his build and stuff like that. But you know what I'm saying? Like he's got that ability to shrug off tackles and exactly what this offense needs a little bit right now. Michael Penix, get the ball out quickly to Jeremy Bernard, let him take it 5 to 10 yards and pick up a first down rather than Michael Penix have to search for a first down and stay in the pocket longer. It would be really helpful to find somebody like that, and I think Bernard can do that. He's also got extremely reliable hands. I think he's only dropped like 4 passes in his entire career, something crazy. He's got a very, very low drop rate, and he's got very strong hands in general. So that would help out too. Then we go on to A.J. Harris, cornerback from Penn State. He's not had the season he wants. He could be a candidate to come back. So, there's other cornerbacks like to watch out for here too that they could end up taking in this 3rd round. It just depends on who's on the board. However, A.J. Harris, with where he's currently being projected, if he does declare, which he could get drafted on his traits alone, I think he's a really smooth athlete. His long speed, though, is nothing to write home about, in my opinion, even though he's like a 5-star guy. I don't think he's like a 4.4 dude. He's probably more of a high 4.4, low 4.5 type of guy, but I do think his fluidity makes up for it. He's got good length and good size. He needs to build into his frame, though, right now. Like, he looks thin out there, and it shows up in play strength, too, at times. He plays physical at the catch point. Like, no, sometimes he's too grabby, so that's not the issue. He just needs to a little bit grow into his body a little bit more, I think, because he is a little bit on the thinner side. Great developmental corner, though. Definitely a guy that I'm looking to take, like, on day 2, somebody with really good upside that they can let sit for a season, hopefully, or even if he has to play towards the back end of the season for injuries, I'm okay with that. Then we go into Pat Cogan here, formerly of Notre Dame, transferred to IU, and he's been their starting center this season. He's been really good. That IU offensive line's been solid, and it's partially, Cogan as a center, you always have to have a good center, man. I say this, I think center is an underrated position in the NFL and college football. It just doesn't matter when you have a good center. A lot of times you have a good offensive line. Pat Cogan has really taken this offensive line and helped them out a lot with calling protections and stuff like that. He's a strong guy. He's got that frame you look for. He's not the longest of guys or anything like that. He also has guard experience too. So this is one where if they let go of Bergeron, then Cogan can also compete over that left guard position as well. So it just gives you that versatility. I was looking for somebody with some sort of versatility like that. His problem, and this is more of like when I really watched him at Notre Dame, I need to get into his full scouting report at IU. I've watched the IU games. I'm a Hoosier. But when it comes to watching his film, I've watched his film strictly from the Notre Dame game, like purely like watching one-on-one of Cogan. And some of the things he did struggle with was I felt like his leverage was a bit of an issue, and he also doesn't have the quickest feet. So like those twitchy rushers, going to give him a bit of a problem. As a center position, you can still go with some of that. I'm not as worried about that, but he can hold up against stronger guys. So that can help him out quite a bit too. Then we go on to round number 6, Dante Coleon, the Godfather. Oh man, he's such a good football player. It's just the medicals. And unfortunately, like we've seen worse where guys like this go undrafted, unfortunately. And there's a really good chance that Coleon does end up going undrafted. It's going to really come down to that. And I don't know what his medicals are going to look like. He's a really, really good football player when he's on the field. Like you can tell a Bearcats defensive line when he is there, when he's not. Now, he is more going to be a nose tackle at the next level, and that's fine. But he can push the pocket. Like, he actually has a bull rush to him. They need another run defender, and I think Coleon would be a great add here on day 3 for this football team. And then on to our final pick here. I'm going with Bray Hubbard from Alabama, Crimson Tide. We get another Crimson Tide player. Bray Hubbard's somebody that I think could be a great box safety combination. He reminds me a little bit like Taylor Rapp. So if I had to make a pro comp, that would be my pro comp on him, is somebody that is a smart football player. He's a tough-nosed guy that has an extremely high motor. So if nothing else, he can be a great special teamer for this football team. And he also has the ability to play run defense at a high level. Now, I do think in terms of an athlete, he's not that guy, okay? So if you're looking for a really good athlete, no. But you got Xavier Watts. He can be the free safety dude for the future, and Bray Hubbard can be the strong safety. That's really what I'm thinking. He can do 2 high safety looks, and you put him in the box. Absolutely. He's got the instincts to come downhill in a hurry and play that, especially with his physicality and motor, that he'll be really, really good on. So when you're looking at box safeties on day 3, there's a plethora of guys you're going to have choices to be able to make, and he could be one of those dudes that you can help build that roster in here. So that's our draft. Looking at the roster now after everything, the offensive line, we drafted Pat Cogan to be that center guard developmental guy, depending on what happens with Ryan Newsel, Matthew Bergeron, both going to be going into contract years in 2027. And then we get a wide receiver in the draft with Jeremy Bernard with our top pick. I think he'd be an immediate impact for them. Then you got Elijah Moore, Cordell Hodge kind of competing out. Plus Bernard can play on the outside. So I list him here in the slot, but like he can play inside out. He's playing more on the outside this season. I'm just, you get your best 3 out there between Pitts, of course, London, Bernard, Hodge, and Moore. I just look at it like Bernard gives them something that they don't currently have in this offense right now with some more yak ability. And then we get more help on defense here with Dante Coleon, with Kairos Tunga coming in free agency. I think that'd be a nice little run defending help with those young pass rushers that they have there. We get cornerback of the future with A.J. Harris to let him develop behind Mike Hughes for a season. And then at linebacker, we want more of the free agency re-sign approach. You could talk me into the other way of getting a linebacker in the draft. It really comes down to what they want to do. Because maybe you say, hey, let's go and get him more of a youth approach. They got J.D. Bertrand. Maybe they can continue to let him develop. With his size limitations, he might be more of just a core special teamer / rotational player. I just wanted to bring in some sort of depth no matter what. Safety, we get a developmental block safety there to finish up the draft, and he can be a core special teamer early on too for this football team. And we go like guys like Josh Wood. So we're gonna fill some core special team ability there, and Hubbard can definitely do some of that with Helms. So that's it here for the Atlanta Falcons Dirty Birds mock draft roster breakdown. Let me know what you think, agree or disagree. What would you do differently? I hope you guys have a good day though, and I'll talk to you here soon.